1 game, 2 hours. Hook Me, Ash of Gods, Redemption. Welcome, folks, to another episode. It's been quite some time, hasn't it? Indeed it has, and as you've already heard, this time we're taking a look at Ash of Gods. Developed and published by Aurum and WhisperGames, Ash of Gods is a tactical turn-based RPG with roguelike storytelling. What does that mean? Well, remember the Banner Saga? Yeah, basically that. So you get to control the journey of 3 different protagonists and how they interact with the world and its inhabitants. And your decisions here actually have a pretty major impact at times, as they determine the relationships with people around you, whether somebody joins your group or not, if people live or die, and at times even how the entire story will progress from here on out. And because you get to control multiple characters, Ash of Gods is not afraid to permanently kill them off if you're not careful. No one is essential to the story, and everybody is vulnerable. So what is the story even about? Well, without going into too much detail to avoid potential spoilers, a century-old curse has been awakened that caused these creatures called the Reapers to appear, who intend to drown the world in blood to awaken the sleeping gods. And while our 3 main characters are affected by the curse in different ways, they all ultimately try to end it. That means throughout the game their paths cross, and we once again get to decide how they interact with each other. Granted, they're still alive at that point, because that is certainly not a given. Let's take a look at the combat. Whenever your characters are not traveling or locked in conversation, they're usually fighting. Bandits, soldiers, reapers, anything that moves really. And the combat in Ash of Gods seems simplistic at first, but actually has some interesting tactical elements to it. So in general, it is turn-based. That means first you get to perform an action with any character from your team, and then the enemy gets to do the same. The only real restriction is that you have to use every member once before you can use a character a second time. Once all units have been used, the turn timer increases. We'll talk about why that is important in just a minute. Aside from health, every character also has an energy bar. Energy can be expended to move an additional distance on the grid or to perform special actions. One thing to note here is that as soon as a character has no energy left, all damage dealt to them is doubled. So in a lot of confrontations, it might make sense to drain a character's energy first. Additionally, the developers tried to remove random dice rolls as much as possible. That means there is no chance to miss and no damage rolls. Your attacks will always hit and they will always deal a fixed amount of damage. So no 95% misses a la XCOM, baby. Fights are won and lost, not by luck, but by your tactical skill. But aside from weapon and character related skills, you also have a deck of spells. And these can be used to buff or heal your own units, as well as to weaken the enemy in various ways. However, the usage of these spells is restricted by the turn timer mentioned before. The stronger the spell, the longer you have to wait to use it. So giving 10 armor to a party member on turn 1? No problem. Swapping health and energy of all enemies? Well, you're gonna have to wait a little for that one, chief. So the game also features some deck building to spice up the combat. But if this isn't quite enough variety for you yet, then let me say that so far, all the protagonists also play very differently. So for example, Thorn Brennan and his group are just humans. So every party member is equally important and they have to help each other out a lot. Whereas if you're playing Hopper Rowley, you will only ever fight solo, but he is extremely overpowered. So the whole dynamic of the fight completely changes. And lastly, Lo Fang is a very capable solo fighter, but also has some weaker companions backing him up. One major difference to something like Banner Saga, however, is that enemies will always deal full damage, even if they only have 1 HP left. And the enemies are no joke, they are quite deadly. One wrong move could easily spell defeat for one of your characters. But while the game does feature permadeath, a character isn't completely killed off just by being defeated once. If a character is defeated in battle, they will gain an injury. And at 4 injuries, that's when they meet their untimely demise. After each fight, you will gain EXP to hone your character's skills, as well as gold to buy items and supplies with. And speaking of supplies, let's talk about traveling on the overworld map. While certain key locations related to the story have to be visited, the routes you take there are yours to choose, and they will determine which events you encounter and how long it takes you to get there. Because reaching locations especially early or especially late can also have positive or negative effects on the story. And while taking a detour might result in some additional loot or a unique item, it also takes time, and your party needs to be fed and it has to be protected from the curse. This is done by using so-called Strixes. These are basically rations. On any given day, each party member will need X amount of Strixes. And failing to provide these will result in an injury. And remember, 4 injuries means death. So managing supplies is also very crucial. And last but not least, there's also the camp. This is where you manage your party, talk to your companions to improve or worsen the relationships with them, and treat injuries in an attempt to prolong a party member's life.
In enemy territory, a campfire gives warmth. But the cold gives protection. Shadow Clan's code for warriors of peace.
Finally, a quick note on the soundtrack and the graphics. I think at this point you've probably already made up your mind whether you love or hate the art style. I adore it, and I love how fluid the animations look, but I can see how it might not be everybody's cup of tea. But in regards to the soundtrack, I don't think there's much to be argued about. It's great. And ultimately, did Ash of Gods get me hooked? Yes, indeed it did. I am already invested in the characters, the lore of the world, and the events unfolding. The writing in general is very enjoyable. Pair that with the amazing visuals, a fun combat system, and the ability to influence the story, and you've got yourself a recipe for greatness. And while I'm not particularly fond of every main character, I am invested in all of their stories. And hey, there's always the possibility to kill off the ones I don't like. So I'm all set. I'm definitely going to put at least a few more hours in. If this has sparked your interest, then Ash of Gods Redemption is now available on Steam for $22.99 if you live in Europe, or $24.99 if you live in the US. Of course, your price may vary depending on your exact location. And unless you have a hard time facing consequences for your actions, I would recommend this to pretty much anybody. It's really quite intriguing. Especially if you enjoyed the Banner Saga, you really can't go wrong here. And with that, we come to the end of another Hook Me. Please remember to like or dislike depending on how you felt about the episode, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.